All right, so today we're going to talk about item placement, health, ammunition, power-ups, batteries, things like that. Um, One of the things we try to do when we're making these games is we're trying to find a balance between giving the player enough stuff to beat the game, but at the same time, in a modern game, we want to make it so that the ammunition count in the player's mind is always something that they're thinking about. They have to make decisions. They don't have unlimited rockets or unlimited, crossbow bolts or something like that. Older games didn't really concern themselves too much with that. There would be just gluttony of ammunition and stuff on the maps, and as games have gotten better, what we find is that the developers will limit the amount of certain types of ammunition, make certain weapons a little bit more rare, so that you can't just beat the entire game with a sniper weapon, whether it's a rifle or a crossbow or whatever, because that type of ammunition is rare. And the other thing we try to do is we try not to limit it so much so that the player gets hopeless and they can't beat the game. And then a final thing is we also want to not limit the player to just the things that we like. Like if your personal weapon is the AR-2, we don't want to force the player to always use the AR-2 because that just happens to be your favorite weapon in the game. It's a good idea to, provide some variety to the player. So there's kind of a balance that we're looking for in the game between, keeping their health at a point where they're worried about dying and, concerned about where they're going to find the next health pack or the next armor or batteries for their suit, where they have to make a decision. Do they want to use their last 3 crossbow bolts to snipe a couple enemies, or do they want to sneak up on them and, try to take them out at a close range? So those kind of things engage the player a little bit more. So I'm going to show you just 2 entities for item placement, and then of course there is the single item placements where you can just place items yourself one by one. So let's take a quick look at kind of the different ways we can place entities. So the easiest and most generic, the default way, I guess is what you would call it, is over here. If you type in item, and these are the items right here. These are all the items in the game. Like this is the battery. Now, some of the items you might see an error appear. I don't know, it's just a bug. That's the bell for brunch at 8:30. But this is how we would place individual items that you specifically, you know that the player is going to need a health kit at this time in the game. So we're going to come in here and we're going to go ahead and offer the player, a health kit and, a couple batteries or something like that for their suit. So the item category is to give the player individual specific items that you want to give them. Now the other option is this guy right here. So this is called an item crate. And we select it from our entity tool. We come over here, we type in item, and you're going to see an entity called item crate. And so it's an item, and the type is item crate. So what this thing does is it's a box, very typical in our FPS genre that there's crates everywhere. And oftentimes they hardly have anything in them, which seems kind of weird, but we're sort of used to it. So we can go through here, and if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we have we're here where it says crate contains specific item, and then where it says item type, you drop this down, and the weird thing is it's every single item in the game. There's entities, logic relays, so we don't want to be placing like logic relays and math counters. What this is really used for is placing items like weapon pistol. So what this would do is if you break this crate open, it's going to spawn a pistol. If you go up here to the items, here's the individual items. So if we wanted this crate to have a battery in it, now the crate has a battery in it. So this is your very typical item crate that you would see in a game. Now there is a default option for this, and that is the item dynamic resupply. So item dynamic resupply, what that does is it attempts to figure out what the player needs the most of, and it will give that to the player. And it works okay. I mean, I don't think it guesses as well as we would like it to. I kind of prefer to specify what items I'm giving the player. But it does work, and it does sort of randomize what comes out of it a little bit. Nothing we need to mess with on the flags here. So this is the item crate. So very typical FPS type thing. You can put whatever you want inside of this. The player may or may not, if you put a bunch of crates and not all of them are item crates, typically that makes the player have to smash through them to see what's inside of them. And a lot of times a player in a hurry will run past them. So these are good for, kind of placing items in the game and seeing if the player will find them. Sort of like, when you're in Skyrim and you're checking every single barrel to see if there's anything in it. Now, the other thing we can place with our entity tool is this guy right here. So what this is the item dynamic resupply. So you saw that this could actually drop an item dynamic resupply. So this allows us to place just an item dynamic resupply in the game outside of the crate. So what an item dynamic resupply does is it has all of these things in the game. Health, armor, ammunition, all these different things. And we can set ratios that we would like the player to have going into an area. So like, say we're going into a boss fight and we would like the player to have at least 50% health going in. Well, if I put a 0.5, this is going to look at the player's loadout and it might give them a health pack depending on where the player's health is at. So all of these numbers through here where it says desired health, desired AR2 ammo all the way down, what these are doing is these are ratios from 0 to 1. So 1 is full, 0 is empty. So like a 0.5 means we would like the player to have 50% SMG ammo ratio going into this level. So if you scatter these throughout your levels, the game will attempt to get the player to these levels. Now it's only going to spawn one thing. So it's going to look at this list and it's going to spawn a single item. So, it kind of, I don't like using these by themselves. I prefer to use this or just individually place items. Because this, when it breaks, it's going to spawn this and then it's going to access this ratio list here. If you place these around the map when the game starts, it's going to spawn stuff. And what you need at the start of the game is not necessarily what you'll need at the end of the game. So I personally prefer, my number one choice is individually placing the items I want the player to have. My second choice is using the item crates. And I really don't use these a whole lot. If I use this, it's actually inside of here. I will set the item type to item dynamic resupply. I don't use these out in the open very often. Because like I said, as you play the game, these are going to change depending on what type of player you are. So I kind of like to use this, or most often I will do this, because then it makes more sense. If you walk into a lab, you might find 2 batteries. But if I walk into someone's woodshed, why would I find some highly technological battery inside somebody's woodshed? So that brings up the next point. When we're placing all this stuff, it should make sense. So if I walk into somebody's kitchen in their house, I probably shouldn't find a big pile of AR2, which is the advanced assault rifle in the game. I shouldn't find a bunch of ammunition for an AR2 in somebody's cupboard. Now, if you make the inside of the house look like maybe there was a fight inside there, some sandbags and bullet holes in the walls, that might make a little more sense. But, if I'm just walking through somebody's garage in your game, and I find batteries for my suit. Well, that doesn't make sense in the game because these batteries are some technological marvel that goes with Gordon's suit. So you shouldn't just find these lying around in random places. I would expect to find these if you had a combine vehicle that was maybe stalled on the side of the road and, some smoke or something like that. Yeah, maybe I'll find a couple of batteries there. But if I'm in a civilian house that's just, you know, abandoned, I'm not going to find things like AR2 grenades or HEV batteries and stuff like that. If you're going to place those items, you have to try to convince the player like why that item would be there. Were there rebels there? So maybe there's some spent ammunition cases on the ground, some empty ammo boxes. Then that's going to make sense to me. If you're just walking through a random grocery store and you've got grenades on the shelf, that doesn't make sense, okay? So remember, we're trying to make things fit, and we're also trying to tell a story with our game. And one of those important things that we've talked about is that when you're building these levels, when I look at the level should tell me a story about what happened there before I got there. So if it's just a regular house, well then the items in the house should be regular house items. Now if it's a house that's obviously been used by the rebels as a fort, well then yeah, maybe I'll find some ammunition or some grenades or some armor or something like that. If I find a wrecked Combine tank, yeah, it would make sense that I will find Combine items there. So I like to think about that kind of thing when I'm placing items. Ammunition, if I'm in a building, there might be an armory. That's where I would find the ammunition, not in some guy's desk, or something like that. Or maybe you've got crates on a loading dock, and that's where you'll find the ammunition. But just a random crate in the middle of a hallway doesn't make sense, okay? All right, so your assignment today is to start playing through your map and either adding or removing items to keep the map entertaining and challenging to the player. Health, batteries, ammunition, that kind of stuff.